You're listening to the Marginally Geeky Show, the epically geeky book club.
Greetings, and welcome to the Marginally Geeky Show. I'm your host for the evening, Eugene Stevens. Tonight, I'm joined by Jennifer, Mandy, and Chris. How are you doing, ladies?
Good. Awesome.
Anything of interest happened since the last time we talked? It's actually been about a month and a half since we talked last. Just schedules were keeping us from recording any earlier than this, and I think some of us needed a little longer to read this book as well, so it kind of worked out, but...
I went to New York City.
And how was that?
And got to see Hamilton and go backstage and be part of the cast. I'm still geeking out about it.
That's awesome.
So that's like the highlight of my life so far this year.
Okay.
It's a pretty good highlight.
Yeah,
that's a good highlight.
It was great.
So did you see Wicked too, or have you already seen that?
No, I've seen it in Austin, but we didn't get to see that. We saw Carousel and Hello Dolly, which Carousel was... Hello Dolly was good, not what like I wanted, I went there wanting to see, but Bernadette Peters was in it.
Oh wow, yeah.
The guy that voiced Hans in Frozen was in it, so yeah, it was good.
Well, alrighty then.
Exciting.
I marched in. Well, it wasn't a parade. It normally was a parade, but from what we were told, they couldn't muster the money to hire the police officers they needed to block off all the streets, so it ended up being processionals, which was fine. A lot less walking, and still enjoyed it. But the big thing was the band we were with is called a Biohazard Brass Band. I can't remember where they're from. They're from a different fort, but man, they were good. They were astonishingly good. So that was a lot of fun marching, dressed up as a Ghostbuster behind them. So, that's my first Ghostbuster event this year. So,
Oh, cool.
But speaking of Wicked, that's actually very close to what we were talking about tonight. Tonight's book is Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire, who actually wrote Wicked as well. I'll go ahead and lead off here and say that actually so when this book was proposed, I don't remember who proposed this book, but when I heard that, I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. I have not seen Wicked. I have not read Wicked, but I've heard about it, and I'm like, I like that idea for a story. So I was like, okay, well, this is going to be like that, but it will be set in the realm of Cinderella. So that's what I initially thought going into it. What I got was not exactly that, or at least not what I was expecting. But I guess I'll go into that more later. Chris, what were your initial thoughts or expectations?
I've only read to chapter 8, to be honest, and so I'll be very quiet this episode. I was really excited about the title because it's like, oh, another side to the story. How cool. And I haven't seen Wicked, but I understand, I know the premise of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty cool. So I was excited to read it, and I downloaded it on Audible because I'm addicted now. And I forget who narrates it. Her name is Jenny Strelin, I think, or something like that.
Super British.
Very, very British.
She is, or the book?
Oh my. Yes. This is coming from somebody who grew up with a great grandmother who was from England. It was like very British.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Mandy, what were your initial impressions or thoughts?
So this is also my first Gregory Maguire. I've never seen Wicked, never read it. And so like you, I was excited about, the other side of the story. I imagine Wicked is better. Like And also, Audible kind of changes the experience of the book because of the twist at the end. Who the narrator is kind of...
That blew my mind.
Well, it's undermined if you're listening to it because of who the character is supposed to be. So that kind of... And, you know, there were times when, like, it got into the well-known part of the story that I just kind of lost. I wasn't paying attention, you know, because I knew what was happening. They were at a ball. And so something different would happen. I'd be like, oh, what? I'd have to back up. So, I liked the different side, and I liked the history and the research he did. I think Wicked is probably better because it's such a huge phenomenon. But yeah, I liked it.
Okay. Jennifer?
So I think I was the one that suggested this book because I have read Wicked and the 3 sequels to Wicked and seen the play and obsessed over it for several years. So I kind of already knew that I liked this author and was wanting to read a lot of his other stuff because he kind of does what he did in Wicked where he gets the minor characters version of the story. And I really liked it because it was the same but different, so you could kind of see how the Cinderella we know today could have been perverted from that story. And I just like his style and his weird, quirky ways of explaining things. So I thought it was interesting, but yeah, that twist at the end really kind of blew my mind a little bit. So,
well, let me ask this before we go any further. So is Wicked actually set in the world of the Wizard of Oz? Because so what my initial impression of this was, it was going to be that we're getting the story of Cinderella, but told from the viewpoint of at least one of the ugly stepsisters. And so I'm like, okay, so I was expecting, not quite necessarily the Disney movie, but, I was expecting there to be magic and to be, at least closer to the story that I initially, know as being Cinderella. And that is not what this is. This book is grounded in, there's no magic. It's like you said, it's like someone took a factual story and twisted it to get what we ended up getting. But
yeah, it's very dark. Wicked is also very dark. The book is much has a much not happy ending or worse ending than the play. It's a happy ending in the play and not so much in the book. But yeah, so it's.
Oh, I think she froze up. She froze up. Maybe she'll be back in a second. Okay, so it was what I thought it was because, like I said, and initially I thought this was going to be set in that world, but that's not the case. So let's kind of start jumping into the story. Now, I'm also going to go ahead and say this. I didn't take notes on this. I was in the middle of doing a bunch of stuff, and normally the way I do these books is I'll listen to them and take notes as I'm going along. Unfortunately, I think I need to work on that because I tend to end up getting too many notes sometimes. And I think it's one of those things I need to try to condense my notes even because I think I drone on and on and on. But I went through and I listened to it and I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to listen to it. I've got plenty of time. It was early in the month. I'm going to listen to it. I'll finish it. And then maybe I can condense my own notes and go back and listen to it a second time and condense my notes as I went along. I couldn't do that. I couldn't listen to this book a second time. I did not care for this book. So I had to go online and found notes. Yeah, so spoiler alert, I didn't care for the book. But
so speaking of spoilers, does Chris just have to suffer through or
I don't mind spoilers. I actually enjoy spoilers. So
okay.
Bring them on. I already know who
her and Lainey are one of those, so yeah.
Okay.
Secrets don't or spoiler alerts don't taint the experience for me.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny because considering what you said earlier when you were saying when you get to a part of the book that you kind of have an idea what's going on, like the ball and stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's the one part of the book I actually like. Okay, well, here's the thing I actually know. The rest of it, I'm just like, what? So, trying to condense this down, the book starts off with Marguerite. She's got two daughters, Iris and Ruth. They roll into this town and they have no money. Her husband has probably been killed. We think he's been killed. Near the end of the book, we find out maybe that's not the case. But they roll into this town in the Netherlands, and they're having to beg for food and money and everything else. And she's trying to be proud about it, but it's kind of hard whenever you're begging. And they end up going up to this cottage, and they meet this little girl, and she's blonde and beautiful, and ask if the one girl's a changeling. Ask if Ruth is a changeling. Ruth is how do I put this?
She's meant to be challenged.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
But and her older sister kind of watches out for her. So they end up finding this painter. What was his name? Shoemaker. Yeah. They end up finding this painter, and she kind of Shoemaker. That's his name. They end up finding this painter, and Marguerite basically says, hey, I can help cook and clean and take care of the house because you obviously need it, and blah blah blah. And he begrudgingly kind of takes them in. So she's cooking and cleaning and taking care of the house, and he has the girls go out and go get flowers and stuff for him to paint, and he talks about how he's not able to paint what he wants to paint because everyone's wanting religious symbols and stuff right now and everything else. So and everyone's flowers, and flowers are stupid, but whatever. That's just how I'm going to make my living. And he wants to paint. He wants to paint Iris. And she doesn't want to be painted first. Fine, her mom basically says, you will be painted. You're gonna stand there or sit there and do whatever he wants, because we're living there and he's paying us and blah blah blah. So he ends up painting her with some different flowers, but he won't let her see it. He also mentions that there's two rooms. There's the room that has the art that he's selling, and then he has the other room, and the other room is the gallery of God's mistakes, and he won't let anyone see that. And so they're in the house, and he's not a bad guy. He doesn't come across as a bad guy. He's definitely kind of an old grump. But
yeah, I was just gonna say he sounds just grumpy and just tired of life and kind of pissed off. He wakes up in the morning instead of waking up dead.
Yeah. So, and then it's at this point that they've kind of got a good thing going, but Marguerite can't let well enough alone. So then she goes to the Vandermeer house and starts advertising that she could help them there and this, that, and the other. And she basically kind of ends up getting the housekeeping job there as well. The Vandermeers. There's the husband. He's kind of well-to-do. He's in the process of everyone's going crazy for tulips. That's the big thing here in the Netherlands. So everyone's investing in tulips, and so he's dealing with that. And the wife is pregnant, and then there's the daughter, and the daughter's the one that met him when they first came into town, Clara. And Clara's very beautiful, and everyone in town just, what little they get to see of her know that she's, an extremely, she's a beautiful child and everything, but she's not allowed to go outside. Like, she barely looks out the window, and she's pretty much just kept inside the house, and which is odd. But thoughts up to this point?
It's kind of slow moving. Because it's basically where I stopped reading is what you just...
Okay.
I stopped reading, and Casper just got introduced.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So
and Casper's his apprentice.
Yes, the painter's apprentice. I think if I'd read this, it would have been better because then I could sort of skim through things. But listening to it, I had to listen to all the detail.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to skim on an audiobook. I don't know if I've ever even tried that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would have just read all the dialogue if I had read the book.
Yeah.
So it was slow. It was slow going.
Jennifer, thoughts up to that point?
I guess, well, you're seeing, a side of their family that you didn't get to see in all the other fairy tales. So I thought that was interesting. And I kind of, caught on early that Marguerite was the worst.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it was a little slow moving, like she said, but it was kind of like, okay, it's going to get good soon. When are they going to start, when are we going to see what happened in the story that we know, I guess?
Okay, yeah, and unfortunately, when you dropped out, I was saying I didn't really care for the book, mainly because it was so different than kind of what I was expecting, and it did take a long time to finally, and I understand, I'm all for bringing a bunch of backstory in, because, I mean, that's kind of the purpose of these type of books, where you're getting someone else's opinion or someone else's viewpoint is, we're bringing in, backstory that's not normally there, and I don't really have a problem with that. It's just, it was so foreign to what I was expecting. It was like my brain was just kind of like, are we reading the right book? Like I literally looked multiple times. I was like, I downloaded the right one, right? Okay, yeah. Good. So I wasn't quite sure sometimes.
I have a question real quick. Did y'all think Margareta was sleeping with the painter with Scone Marker?
I thought maybe, but I don't know for certain.
Well, then she would make that comment about him and Casper, so maybe she tried to and he refused, or I don't know. Wouldn't put it past her because she was.
Yeah, I wouldn't have put it past. If it kept a roof over her head and her children's head, I don't think she would have.
Yeah.
Said no.
Well, hold on, Chris, until we keep going. So
just wait.
Yeah, just wait. All right.
Totally knew that she did what she did. By the way, I was like,
I read that in the synopsis, so I know that, but I don't know how it happens.
One of the things I was saying, Jennifer, is I listened to the book straight through. I didn't take notes on it, and I was like, I'll just take notes on it the second time. I couldn't do it. I couldn't listen to it again. I had to go find notes online. So anyway, so I'm having to kind of paraphrase here. So basically, they end up moving into the Vandermeer's house, and she's once again, doing the housekeeping or whatever. And Iris is basically kind of tasked with becoming a friend for Clara. Like it's almost like, oh hey, we bought you a friend.
That's a line from the movie. They say that verbatim.
Oh really? Wow.
That's the whole reason they're there, right? It's because they want a friend for their daughter.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. It's like, well, okay, fine, we'll do this, and I guess you can help cook and clean too. So whatever. Yeah. But the mother she's pregnant, and she starts having some problems, and it's at this point. Oh wait a minute, let's see here. At this point, a couple other things happen. Casper starts really kind of hanging out with Iris and becoming friends with her, and Shoemaker ends up painting Girl with Tulips, which is actually a painting of Clara with these beautiful tulips, and everyone's like, this is your masterpiece. This is the greatest art you will probably ever do. Definitely the greatest thing you've ever done before. Everyone's like, all over it and everything else. And so that's helping him out with that. It talks about here on the notes, talking about seeing an imp, and she kind of goes on about that in the book, seeing this imp at the house or whatever. And to me, that was, I don't know, I found that confusing. I was like, okay, well, are we getting some of the magic, some of the magic I was expecting? Is that how this is coming in? There's an actual imp, and it's not. It's more metaphorical. It's like, okay, there's bad stuff happening in this house, and of course, back, the time period that it's set, we used to blame stuff like that, on imps or fairies or
think it was the kids.
demons or whatever. And
it was kind of the
You think
kids'
so?
like way of. To me, it was like they're both very immature, and they were like, "Oh, you're a changeling. There's an imp," that kind of thing. That seemed to be like their explanation for everything from their viewpoint. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that. Like I said, I think it's because, and like I said, in the back of my head, I kept expecting, this magical element to slowly start seeping into it. I was thinking, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it's going to be introduced. So, like I think at one point I was like, okay, so maybe it's imps that are doing this, and it's not, we were told they're fairies, but they're actually, she sees them as being, harmful imps or demons or whatever. And of course, they helped the one stepsister, but they didn't help me and everything else. So, totally wrong on that. I tend to be wrong about a lot of stuff when reading, so I try not to think about it. But the mother, Henrika, ends up falling ill and dies a few weeks later. It's at this point now. Margarita's already a piece of work, but things start to move pretty quickly at this point because the next thing, it seems like it's a pretty quick turnaround for her to end up taking over the household and then end up marrying
6 weeks.
Yeah,
said.
Vandermeer.
Woo.
Yeah, really quick.
Way to mourn your wife, buddy.
Yeah, I was like, what's the mourning period in Holland in 16th century?
Yeah, no joke. So it's at this point, so they're like, okay, so they've moved in. She's now the head of the household. Vandermeer's having problems because the whole tulip thing is not turning out like everyone expected. Not only has he heavily invested in this, but he's got everyone else in the town heavily invested in it. So of course they're starting to knock on the door and be like, "Hey, dude, where's my money at?" So what money they did have is starting to dry up, and then there's this kind of little side escapade. It everything freezes over, and the river freezes over, and they end up going out skating on the river, and they get really far away from town, and Casper's telling them, "Hey, y'all are going too far. We need to turn back," and they're like, "Screw you, we're going to keep going." And they end up finding this windmill. And then Claire starts telling this story about how she's a changeling. And it keeps going. It talks about this. At first, you kind of get the impression, or at least I got the impression, that when it meant a changeling, it meant someone who like physically was changing forms. And then you kind of start to understand it means that no, they're changing their viewpoint or their personality. They've come to a point in their life where everything is now different. But she tells this story about bird people. Once again, I'm like, okay, well, maybe the magic part's coming in. I don't know. It's still really weird. Bird people kidnapping her and then letting her go as a little girl. And we start, it's at this point we're like, okay, well, maybe that's why this little girl is so kind of odd, because she had some real serious shit happen to her as a kid. We do finally get the explanation as to why she's not let out of the house, because she was kidnapped as a kid and mom kind of went off her rocker and was like, well, you're never leaving the house again because I can't afford to lose you. So yeah, thoughts up to this point? Anyone?
I was very taken aback with how like antisocial she was and how scared of the world she was, and I was like, how is he gonna turn this around and make her the Cinderella that sneaks out to go to the ball and meets the prince and ends up getting married to him and blah blah blah. So that's what I kept thinking the whole time. It's like she's like so scared of everything. This is never gonna happen.
Yeah. Like, it was a big deal for her to, like, even go in the backyard, like, past the gate or whatever. Yeah. That was, like... So, now we start... And it's at this point we start to get kind of a semblance of the story that at least I was expecting. So we start hearing about the Dowager Queen of France. She is coming with her, and they weren't 100% sure. Like they kind of went back and forth about whether it's her nephew or her son, but she's bringing a young man looking for a wife, and they're going to have this big ball. And at the same time, we've got this neighbor showing up, Van Stolk, and he shows up to the house and he's like, hey, listen, you have no more money. I'm going to start buying furniture and start buying you out, because you owe a bunch of money. And the first thing that he wants to buy is the Girl with Tulips painting. But that's the one time like the dad snaps out of his depression and comes down and was like, no, absolutely not. You're not going to take it, blah, blah, blah. And he reveals that he's loaned it back to Shoemaker so that he can present it before the queen. So there's going to be this big ball, and there's two things going on. On the one hand, we've got this prince, technically, I guess, looking for a mate. And then on the kind of the back channel, it's also she's probably going to be looking for an artist to do this final painting. And whoever ends up getting that commission is going to end up, rolling bank, have pretty much be set for the rest of their life. So all of the artists are putting together their portraits and getting them there so that at this one big event, not only is it kind of the coming out party for the nephew, but this is also supposed to be a big art gallery exhibit, and she's going to hopefully make a decision that's going to change someone's life. But we also kind of get this information that Van Stolk is. Was it here that it was revealed that he's probably the one that kidnapped Clara as a kid, or was that a little later on in the book? Because I think it was about here when we kind of get that information dropped.
Yeah, about now.
Okay. So that kind of ties that up a little bit. So, but they have no money. And Marguerite has basically said at this point, the only way that she can save this family is to marry off one of the daughters. And obviously it has to be Iris. So she gets them both, gussied up and is going like, all right, well, we're going to the ball and I'm going as well. But Clara is not going. Iris at this point is like, well, obviously it's not going to be me. I'm not attractive. I'm not going to be able to, this is not going to work. I'm not going to, catch the eye of a prince by any means. Clara, you have to go to the ball. You have to save the family. And Clara's like, nope, not doing it. But they end up working with her. They finally convince her that she has to go. And they end up pawning off a bunch of stuff. So that with Casper's help, so that they can get this ball gown, this golden ball gown for Claire to wear. And she's like, fine, I'll go, but not as myself. She said she has to have a different identity. And she ends up wearing Marguerite's white slippers because she needed some shoes to go with. So, I'm sorry?
I did kind of love that part when the shoes finally showed up.
Yes.
And they were just white leather shoes.
Yeah, I was like, wow, that was really changed to being crystal or glass. Yeah, so which I'm sure these would be a lot more comfortable than glass. So, yeah, so then we actually get to the ball. And the ball, of course, is what, everyone knows from Cinderella. That's kind of the big thing or whatever. So I'm like, all right, so it's at this point that I guess my brain finally accepted.
Is he frozen for you?
Everything for the ball, and it's like, okay, well, am I frozen?
You were frozen.
Can you see me?
Frozen.
I was
you
frozen.
finally
Dang it.
accepted,
Okay.
and then that was it.
Okay, I finally accepted that there's not going to be any magic in this book because we finally got the explanation as to how and why she, gets the dress and gets, suited up and ready to go to the ball. So, thoughts before the ball?
I don't know. This is weird. The way it all happened was really weird.
Does this? How is this book sounding to you at this point, Chris?
Well, I read the synopsis, and I really always think I have to read this. I think the woman who narrated the audiobook, I think, sort of ruined it a little bit for me. Just the cadence of her voice and the pace that she went. So it's interesting. I mean, how are they going to turn this fairy tale and make it so that it's actually real life events that could actually be believable? How did it get all turned around and mice and fairy godmothers and stuff? And I want to read it.
Okay,
I really do.
So we get to the ball. So the ball's happening, and there's lots of things going on. Marguerite, Iris catches Marguerite threatening to burn the girl with tulips painting, but she ends up stopping her. They have this whole confrontation. Whenever the queen shows up, of course, there's the introduction with her nephew or whatever, and everyone's expected to go meet the prince. And they show up, and he's pretty much just like, a dead fish for the most part, until Iris gets up there, and then she strikes a conversation with him and finds out, oh, hey, he's actually maybe kind of interesting, and he doesn't seem to care that she's not that attractive.
Speaks English.
Yes. And so they start having this conversation, and, it actually kind of maybe dawns in the back of her head, wow, there might actually be a chance. I might actually be able to pull this off. And then walks our Cinderella, as it were. And of course, he just completely drops everything. He's not even paying attention to her. He's just, enamored with her. And they spend the rest of the evening together. It sounds like it was kind of implied that a little hanky-panky went on there, but I don't know.
Totally raped her. He had to have raped her. There's no way she would have done that consensually, as timid as she was. Yeah.
So, which is, lends credence to, how and why she ends up the way she does, a little bit later on. Iris at this point has been, she thought Clara was going to be the savior of the family, and then she kind of let down her guard for a moment, actually had hope that maybe she could be, something more than she is, and then it's immediately dashed. So, you feel bad for her. You're like, well, crap, girl, sorry about that.
She's also struggling with her feelings for Casper this whole time. Like, she's
and that's
in love with him, and he seems to like her, but she's doubting herself all the time, and then she thinks that because of her mom that he's, not interested in women, and so there's this whole I don't know.
Yeah, and I completely glossed over that whole thing about Shoemaker offering her an apprenticeship. Like, he's like, she keeps telling him, I'm not a painter. I don't know what I'm doing. And he's like, but you have a good eye. You can see it, and I can work with that. And so, there's a little bit of kind of build up there. But then the whole thing rolls in with Casper, and she's like, well, then I have to quit this. So there's a lot of hits, one right after another. Her hope of maybe being a painter or doing something artistic is all of a sudden dashed because of all this other stuff that's going on, and the fact that she might actually, marry someone and save her family, and all of a sudden now that's gone too. So, so as the ball's going on, it's getting late, it's starting to wind down, and we get smoke. And it's coming from the painting room. So everyone clears out. They head back to the house. They don't even bother looking for Clara. It's, they're lucky kind of to get themselves back to the house.
Well, no, they try to rescue her. Or Ruth
did they?
does.
I forgot about that.
Ruth, because they're outside talking, and then with the master, and then Ruth storms off, and then the fire starts, and she bursts into the room, and they find her with the prince, and then Clara kind of disappears from them.
Okay. I forgot about that.
Did she disappear with the prince?
Well, no, she like went out the window and he was trying to help with the fire, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Um,
But she left a shoe behind.
yes, and of course she leaves the shoe behind. So we get back to the house. The girls are basically sleeping, and Clara shows up. She's disheveled. You know, she's just a royal mess or whatever. And about that time, Marguerite comes in. And Marguerite comes in, and she's not fully awake, and she sees her, and she thinks she's a dream. And it's at this point she starts running her mouth and starts laying out all this stuff about how, she's the one that killed the mother. And basically, you know, I'm the one that got us in this position, and I'm the one that had to do this to watch out for my girls, and because y'all have been a burden on me all my life, and I have to do what I have to do to. She's just a real piece of work.
She's what you call a shitty parent.
Yeah.
She's a terrible person.
Greedy.
Well, not just parent. She's just a shitty person all the way around.
You don't need to be blaming your kids for your crappy view of the world.
Yeah. So she ends up, you know, listing off a bunch of stuff that she's done and just royally, you know, screwing everything up for everybody. But she ends up going back to bed.
But no, she confesses to murdering the mom.
Yeah,
yeah. She's like, oh, and I poisoned her, and I murdered, and blah blah blah, and she's back to haunt me, and she just like confesses this to her daughters and her stepdaughter,
who she didn't know she was there because she thought she was a ghost or a fairy or something or another.
I'm surprised she didn't freak out at that point and just like lose her mind finding that out, or maybe she suspected it the whole time.
I kind of thought that too. Like, I was like, is this about to get really dark? And she's like going to take the, cause she, you know, she pretty much kept to herself in the kitchen. I was like, is she going to take the pot and like do Marguerite then? Like, is that how this is going to go down? But she's obviously traumatized as well, which I think leads, like you said, leads credence to the idea that, she was probably raped, back at the ball.
She has blood on her shoe, and she's like, I don't want to talk about it. She makes comments that allude to the fact that she was taken advantage of. Yeah.
Not quite how the Disney version turned out after the fall, but once again, so the next morning, Prince shows up, has the slipper, says they're looking for the girl that had the that was missing the slipper, and so Marguerite recognizes the slipper, said, oh, it absolutely had to be Iris, so of course it doesn't fit, and they're like, well, this is definitely their slipper. She's like, yeah, and he's like, well, that's not really what we're here for. We're here to try to find who burned everything down, because like you're going to jail and shit's gonna hit the fan, and it's not not gonna turn out too well for you. And it's at this point that Claire shows up, and he recognizes her miraculously from the night before.
But they notice that Ruth has blisters on her hands when she's putting the shoes on, so they realize like she's the one that did it.
Oh yeah. And there was I glossed over another point. We'll get to that here in a second. So they figure out that it was Clara, and because he found the woman he was really looking for, they kind of drop all the charges. And it's like, okay, well, whatever. I found this girl. Whatever. Fire. Who cares? So yeah, it's at this point that the story pretty much kind of wraps up. Earlier in the book as well, they do finally get to go in to see the other room of paintings, and they're supposed to be so horrific and so, mind-boggling that Marguerite starts to have vision issues, and she's like, I'm literally going blind because, your paintings were so ungodly that I'm going blind. And she constantly, keeps talking about that. That's one of the other reasons.
So extra.
Yeah, that's one of the other reasons why she's she wasn't quite sure Claire was there because she couldn't, you know, she wasn't able to really see. So, so we end up, you know, wrapping up the story for the most part. Finds Claire, they go on and, you know, quote unquote, happily ever after at this point. It's at this point we hit the epilogue, where we find out that the story has not been told from Iris's point of view, which is weird because everything up to this point is told from Iris's point of view. Literally, I'm looking at, you know, I'm not an English person by any means, but the pronouns and stuff used are clearly from Iris's point of view. But anyway, the book is actually being told from Ruth's point of view. And even though they treat her, you know, as if she's mentally handicapped the entire time, she's obviously a smarter cookie than she was letting on. Because then she starts to tell all the stuff that she actually did. She's the one that was putting, I believe it was pepper in her mom's eyes so that she couldn't see. She's the one that, like you said, actually is the one that set the fire. She heard her mom talking about the burning down the painting, and then she's the one that actually went in and did it. She's the one that gives us the epilogue and basically tells us how everything ends up panning out. Clara had the prince's children and saved the family from poverty. Vandermeer had recovered. He finally kind of gets his mind back. And then she tells us that Iris passed away. And that was, you know, extremely sad, extremely heartbreaking for her. And that, you know, this is the story that really happened, but somehow or another people have taken this story and twisted it and turned it into the fairy tale that, you know, that people love and talk about, you know, to this day. So, final thoughts.
So that twist at the end, the narrator was Ruth all along. So on Audible, that really doesn't work because Ruth is supposed to be mute. So, like, to have her tell you the whole story, and then in the end, it's like, haha, it was me all along. It didn't, maybe reading it, it has a different effect because she's like, oh, she could just write the story. But that's one of the few times I've been like, I really needed to read this instead of listen to it on Audible because it didn't hit with that reveal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because at the beginning of the book, when it starts out, and then she goes back, like the whole story is a flashback, you kind of get the impression that it's Iris the whole time based on that and the story. And I didn't suspect at all, so that was kind of clever. But yeah, there were a lot of things in that in her account that, you know, were different from the actual story, like the father was alive and just went kind of crazy, I guess. And
yeah.
Cinderella ended up actually helping them, which surprised me after all that they had been through, and she was a little selfish the whole time, but she did actually, you know, hold up her end of the bargain, I guess. It was very dark, the whole thing. But I don't know if you guys could hear me when I was talking before. I might have cut out, but his stories tend to be like the darker version, the untold side of whatever, you know, story he's telling. So like all of his, he does this a lot with a lot of fairy tales where he'll tell the backstory or the alternate story that somehow could have been true, but it got warped or something, which I think it's kind of cool. But also, you know, it can be very frustrating when you don't grow up with that story.
Well, like I said, I mean, I like some of these stories that I've run across that are like that, where it's, another person telling the story from their viewpoint, especially if it's on the opposite side. Like one of the first ones, you know, going back as a kid is, you know, you've probably, you know, read the book where it's the Three Little Pigs, but told from the side of the big bad wolf. And it's like, you know, it was just, you know, they were framing me the whole time. It was, you know, it wasn't like that. You know, which is funny and, you know, yeah, like I said, I think the biggest problem I had with it was the fact that it was more, I was expecting it to be in that magical world and just from their viewpoint, and the fact that it was told like it was this is what really happened and this is how it got twisted and that became a fairy tale. So I don't know if my preconceptions are what caused me to dislike this book, but yeah, I ended up not really caring for the book, and to the point that I'm almost a little nervous to actually read Wicked, because I'm like, wow, if this is what it's going to be like, I don't know.
I kind of look at it as like he's taking a fairy tale, which is clearly not a true story in our minds, right? And because it has magic and it has all these things that could happen. And he's telling it in a way that maybe it could have happened in real life, and by removing the magic, And like in Wicked, he kind of, sort of does the same thing with the magic, but there is a little magic in there. It's a lot different from the movie you watched or the book you might have read by, L. Frank Baum or whatever. But I don't know. I think it's kind of neat to give that story. Also, fairy tales originally were very dark, and this is kind of a throwback to that. Like Sleeping Beauty got raped, and the stepsisters really cut their toes off or something to make their shoe fit in the original Grimm whatever version. So I don't know, it's like a homage to that time. But
thoughts, Chris? You said you still want to go back and read it, right?
I do. I still want to. I think reading it would be a lot better, especially since knowing that it's Ruth's version, and because it's very Iris centric, so she must have either idolized her younger sister and just didn't bother seeing the world through her own eyes. It was just through living vicariously through Iris, and that's how she sees it. But I liked her. I like that all the Disney fairy tales that we grew up as kids, and my kids have seen, they're all at their roots very, very dark. Like the Little Mermaid dies, she sacrifices herself. You said Cinderella, her stepsisters, they cut their heels and half their foots off. Oh, and their eyes got pecked out by ravens. And it's horrible, these really dark things. You're like, why would you tell that to a kid? That's traumatizing. Hansel and Gretel, all that stuff. They're not rooted in happiness. It's almost like they're cautionary tales. Like, don't be like this, or this is going to happen. So just to hear, I like that it's another point of view of the whole story, and it's like Ever After, that movie with Drew Barrymore.
Yeah, or Maleficent.
Yeah, and I love that movie, so I do really want to read it.
I think his books are more effective if you read them. I didn't listen to it, I read it, but I could see how it would be confusing. So I know you're big on Audible, Eugene, but if you do read Wicked, I would say read it.
Yeah. The narrative,
then watch the play.
It was hard. It was like listening to the Queen. Like you imagine that this is what it sounds like. Sorry. Very proper English, and she has that. She's almost, and I'm sure this isn't how she normally talks, but it was boring to listen to her talk.
It was very dry.
Yeah, very dry.
She didn't do voices or anything like.
She did a French accent.
Hello.
It wasn't like Luke Daniels. No, Luke Daniels.
Yes, not very. It wasn't really good voice work.
Yeah, it was very. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was disappointing. So I definitely want to read the book.
Which, I guess once you start listening to several books and you start listening to some of these readers that do really good voice work and stuff, it's hard to go back to someone who's literally just kind of reading the book and putting, a little twist on, the vocalization, but not a lot. Like if you picked it up, if you just randomly found some place to it and heard her reading dialogue, you'd be able to guess that it's a man or a woman, but you wouldn't know who it was. Like you wouldn't be like, oh, that's clearly him.
Yeah,
speaking.
Yeah. The characters. Yeah,
you wouldn't know who she's talking about.
So,
I'm sorry you didn't like it.
It's all good. Like I said, the reason we started the group is so that I could branch out and try other stuff that I wasn't necessarily looking at reading or so. But no, it's all good. It's all good. because I know we've read a couple of things that some other people have been like, and I'm like, no, that was a really good book. But the next book that we're reading, I don't know. We'll have to talk. We may have to, just because I forgot how long this book is. Like, it's a 20-hour Audible book, but so we may have to push back on recording time mid-month for the next one as well. But our next book is How Star Wars Conquered the Universe by Chris Taylor. No, no vocalization or anything in it. It's just the guy reading the book, but it is so jam-packed with Star Wars trivia and information, and it does get on some points where it kind of goes straight through talking about, like, when we first start talking about making, like, the movies, he'll start talking about it and kind of stick with it. But at different points in the book, like, he kind of wanders into other interesting things. Like, he just literally wanders into the 501st and how they came about and all this other stuff. So, if you're a Star Wars fan, I can't wait for you to listen to it, because I think you will really enjoy it. So,
listen to it yet? Have you
yes.
started yet?
This is probably the 5th or 6th time I've listened to it.
Oh,
yes. Okay. So yeah, no,
So it's a good audiobook.
I mean, the guy who reads it's energetic, and like I said, it comes through. It's well done. Yeah, you would enjoy it, and it's one of those things that you can pick up and listen to for a little bit and put back down, because it's not a story. It is. I mean, there are stories in it about how the movies were made and stuff, but it's also just a lot of other random things thrown in there. So it should keep your interest. So let's go move on and talk about other things that we've been reading. Was anyone read anything recently they enjoyed or didn't enjoy?
Yeah, we just finished the 3rd book of the Magic 2.0 series, and it was really good. And I didn't really like this story itself, but I liked the way it ended. And then we just started listening to 4th one, Fight and Flight. So
I need to do the 4th one. I've listened through 3, but then the 4th one wasn't free on Kindle Unlimited, so I didn't listen to that one.
Well, good deal. Speaking of Scott Meyer, I read another book of his. As much as I want him to keep writing the Magic 2.0 series, he wrote a book called The Authorities, and it's read by the same author. I mean, by the same reader, mm-hmm. and he reuses some of the voices. So it's kind of interesting to hear, a voice, that I've come to love as a character in this one series being used for a different character that in some cases has a vastly different personality. But it's about this street cop that just kind of like randomly falls into this super crime fighting group that's being sponsored by this multi-billionaire, and
Batman.
Not so much. Like he's basically just kind of like the spokesperson. He's like, hey, listen, I'm putting a bunch of money and technology into this, and these are the awesome team that I have to do it. And the role that he cast him for ends up being hilarious. And the other characters, I would not mind if the next book he writes is a sequel to this one, because I'd actually like to kind of see more of this universe. Like I said, as much as it pains me to say that I wouldn't be getting another Magic 2.0 book, I would actually be okay with getting another one from him. So if you like Scott Meyer, check out The Authorities, because I did greatly enjoy it. So, and I'm not going to list all the stuff that I re-listened to while getting ready for testing and everything else. So, Jennifer, you've been reading anything else, or?
Yeah, so I didn't make last month, so it's been, I guess, 2 months since I've talked to y'all. So I read for another book club that hasn't actually met about this, You Touch My Hair and Other Things I Still Have to Explain by Phoebe, what's her name? I can't remember her last name, but she's hilarious. She's one of the stars of the Two Dope Queens podcast, and I was laughing the whole time when listening to it. I also read half of Cadillac Desert, which is a super depressing but informative book about water policy in the West and how we've basically killed our water, our rivers, and everything by damming them and diverting water. And yeah, it's, like I said, really depressing, written in the 80s and still relevant today.
No.
And
Yay!
I know. I'm so full of joy lately, right? There's another book I read that was really good, but I can't think of it, so I'll have to let you know later.
Okay.
Oh,
Have you been reading anything? Oh.
Well, I started listening to We Have No Idea for my other book club, but didn't finish that either. So,
When does that one due?
oh, we already met like a month ago, almost a month ago. I literally had 4 books in 1 month, and it was like, fuck it, I'm not going to get through all of them. That's why I couldn't get that one done, and I didn't finish any of them, obviously, so. Yeah. Failing at life.
Mandy, have you been reading anything else?
So I reread A Wrinkle in Time.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to read that.
I haven't seen the movie yet. I forgot how annoying Charles Wallace was. That kid is so annoying. So I'm hoping the movie kind of tempers that a little.
Cute in the movie.
Huh?
He's a cute kid in the movie.
Okay, well that's good because he's so annoying.
So you've seen the movie, Jen?
Yeah, I don't remember the book very well, but I saw the movie.
How was the movie?
It
In
was
general.
pretty good, but the story did kind of jump around, and it was kind of hard to follow. And I know that it's hard to put that book or that story in a movie because it's just so all over the place. But it was pretty. It was just, yeah, a little underwhelming, but you know.
Gotcha.
Not terrible.
Well, before we close up, I don't know. Do we want to discuss, just for time reasons, do we want to discuss our thoughts on Ready Player One, or do we want to go ahead and wrap up?
Who's seen it?
I think everyone here.
We could do a quickie. Yeah.
All right. Well, just really quickly. Not as good as the book. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more the second time. Not as many music references as there were in the book. Definitely a little more heavy leaning on video games. But if you love pop culture, you owe it to yourself to go see the movie, because it's. And I've told people this before. Once I saw it and I knew what it wasn't, I could appreciate it for what it was, and I did appreciate it for what it was. I thought it was a good movie, so I'll probably end up owning it whenever it ends up coming out. So, Chris?
Going into it, and we told the kids too, like, it's not the same as the book. You have to sort of suspend disbelief and just sort of go in thinking it's a brand new story. So they didn't do that, and they didn't like it. I tried to, as much as possible, like, it's a brand new story. Let's just see what Ernest Cline maybe thought about it. If we could do it over again, what would we do? I'm glad that there wasn't as much music. I'm not a huge Rush fan. Sorry, Rush. I know that's like blasphemous because they're a Canadian band.
I was going to say they're Canadian.
I know, and I thought for years that Geddy Lee, who's the lead singer, was my grandpa. But some video game stuff's lost. I need to play that much, but I thought it was cool, and I like you, Eugene. I think I'd like it the second time around, knowing how the difference is, that I can just shut that part off and watch it again and enjoy more. I really like what they did with H, though. That was my favorite character. Yeah, really, really liked H.
Yeah,
He was funny.
Yeah.
See.
Mandy, thoughts?
So I love Lena Waithe, and I love her as H. She had so much like explaining to do while running or driving. I was like, you really could have used her better. But and I kind of like, I've been listening to the soundtrack for like the past 2 weeks because I really liked it, and I don't like Rush either. So when the first trailer came out and Tom Sawyer was the song, I was like, what the hell? And I'd forgotten Rush is a clue in the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was no Rush in the movie. But yeah, you could kind of tell like H's identity. Like if you listen to the music that's playing in his workshop, it's kind of a little girlier than the rest of it. It's like Prince and it's the Temptations, and like all the songs on the soundtrack are like H's themes. So I went the second time. I read that Spielberg wouldn't allow any references to his movies except for Back to the Future because the DeLorean and so like the creators, the digital guys would try to hide references in the movie because there's so much going on. And
T-Rex.
The T-Rex, oh yeah. And he caught everything.
Wasn't that? Sorry. I was thinking, wasn't that his movie? But never mind. Could have been from anything.
But yeah, I know he can't. I know he relented because I heard that too. He originally was like, "No, I don't want any of my stuff in there." Like, dude, you are the '80s. Yeah. How? What?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's gonna have to be something.
So, like when you said how the Mogwai came in that box that looks like the one the orb
is in. Yeah.
But there's supposed to be a gremlin in the final fight scene, and so I was looking for that little guy the whole time, and I never found him. I saw it twice. So yeah, I'm gonna have to buy it and like pause every scene and find him.
Yep.
Where's Waldo?
Yeah.
What were you saying? What were you gonna say, Jen?
I said, "Where's Waldo?"
Yeah. So, what were your thoughts?
I liked it for what it was. Yeah, it wasn't the book. It wasn't as good as the book, and they just completely changed the whole story. How they found the keys, how they met each other. You know, Og wasn't even like as big of a part of it, and you know how he got the quarter was different. Like everything was different. And usually with books like this, they change a few things, but like, you know, for the most part, the big stuff stays the same. But like the only thing that stayed the same was the characters and the concept of the Oasis. And so that kind of annoyed me, but it was still, for what it was still pretty good.
Yeah, and like knowing that Ernie Klein was involved with the screenplay, that's like, well, it's kind of.
Yeah, he had signed off on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you've seen him or met him or something, right?
I've met him. I met him at Classic Game Fest. He's actually going to be back again this year, and my copy of Ready Player One back behind me here is signed. So
same.
Yeah.
Did you meet him at the screening, Mandy, for a movie or something?
No, I was at Classic Game Fest, and did you get the Atari cartridge that he was handing out?
No, I didn't get the Atari cartridge. So. I was dressed, of course, in Ghostbusters gear, and of course he was asking, he's like, "Well, have you been out to see the car yet?" And I'm like, "No, the car's here." So of course I had to go outside and see the Ecto 88. So which listening to another podcast that's very heavily Ghostbusters, they're like, "Yeah, it's kind of funny that nothing from Sony ended up in this movie. Why would you do that, Sony? You douchebags." But I mean, they're kind of weird when it comes to their licensing of stuff. But yeah, I was also telling my aunt, who ended up going to the same showing the second time I went to see it, all the stuff. Well, a lot of the stuff in the Shining, that was the actual movie that they digitally inserted them in. That's why it looked so much like the original movie. Because that first scene when they're walking down the staircase, I'm watching going, Jesus, this looks really, really good. Well, yeah, it's the actual movie, dummy.
But in the book, they actually go into the movie, right? Like that's part of the thing. They act out one of the movies, and
but it wasn't The Shining. It was it was, which is kind of odd because I mean, and going back and what's funny is now listening to how Star Wars Conquered the Universe. It's very clear that Kubrick and Spielberg were friends or have been friends, and like he obviously holds him in high regard to be like, hey, we're gonna jump one of your biggest movies into this and make it a key plot area. So, but yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for this month. Like I said, our next book is How Star Wars Conquered the Universe by Chris Taylor. We'll put up, hopefully, when we figure out when we're gonna do the review on that one. Normally it's at the beginning of the month, probably going to be closer to mid-month, just because, like I said, it is a pretty long book. So, but we'll see when we get there. So if you would, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Music. You can also find us at epicallygeeky.com and on the social stuff at Facebook at Epically Geeky, Instagram, and Twitter. Where can we find you online, Chris?
On Instagram at Cedar Birch Cottage. we're documenting our kitchen renovation right now, and I'm on this podcast and Epically Geeky.
Mandy, where can we find you?
On Twitter at Mandy Jo Shelton, Joe no E.
Jennifer, where can we find you online?
She froze.
Oh no, she froze. You can find Jennifer at Het's Going to Be Me on Instagram. I think it's the main place to find her. And you can follow my individual wacky adventure online at Optimus Gene on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For everyone on the site, have a good night.